Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Hayes 2017 Salary Guide webinar. For those who have just dialed in now, I'll run through a couple of housekeeping points before we begin. Everyone has been muted on entry, so please send any questions through to the Hayes WebEx host, and we will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. You can get more information on this topic on our website at hayes.ca/salaryguide. And now I'm happy to hand the presentation over to our host, Jim Fearon.
Dina, thanks Dina. Hello everybody, thanks for dialing in, and good morning or good afternoon to you depending on where in Canada you currently are. Thanks for dialing into today's webinar where we're going to share with you the results from our survey of employers and hiring managers from across Canada. Sorry for that. My name is Jim Fearon. I'm the VP for the Central and Western regions of Hayes, Canada. I've worked for Hayes for almost 19 years, 5.5 of which has been here in Calgary. I'm also joined by Matt Donovan and Mazen Fagali, who are both senior consultants in our business. Matt's based in Calgary and has been recruiting in property here for the last 4 years, whilst Mazen's works in our Toronto office, where he recruits in property across the GTA. We'll have you for approximately 30 minutes to share the results of the survey, and then have around 10 minutes at the end for any questions that you have. As Dina said, please type any questions that you have into the chat box as we go, and we'll pick them up at the end and try and answer as many of them as we possibly can. Okay, to start off with, let's just have a little bit about the survey before we get into the detail. As most of you know, we produce an annual salary guide which shows typical salaries paid across a selection of industries and functional areas, cross-reference the level of experience and type of company the role may be found in. The salaries are based on what we see every day in the roles we fill and from the candidates we meet, and it's become an invaluable reference tool for literally thousands of hiring managers across the country, and we're very proud of its simplicity and user-friendliness. If you want to receive a copy of the 2017 guide, you can go to hayes.ca where you can request a copy. I think we've got them available from the 19th of December, and we'll get them out to you as quickly as we possibly can. In addition to the guide, we also survey our clients about their hiring plans, salary changes, business activity forecasts, and their confidence in the economy in general. This year, we've included up to 5 years of data to show trends in the job market, which puts us in a position to see things that others can't, and allows us to provide valuable advice and recommendations to our clients. Today's webinar will look at the general market and where the property industry falls within the market. This year, the survey was completed by 4,000 hiring managers, HR professionals, and business leaders across the country, covering 16 different industries or sectors and 20 functional areas. I'll pull out regional industry differences and variances as we go along for some comparison's sake. Okay, as we like to do, let's start with the headlines. So, corporate Canada's confidence in the economic stability recovers to 2013 levels. Business activity forecasts return to 2014 level. Hiring and compensation are not expected to increase in line with business activity just yet. Recruitment, retention, and employee development efforts must be targeted to align with business. Employers rely on temporary and contract workers for productivity, but many are not getting the most from this resource. And then just to look at some property-specific highlights. Business activities are marginally higher than the national average. Hiring is not expected to increase in line with business activity, and most employers are considering increasing their compensation packages. So let's look at this year's overall market trends. It's always good to start with a look at how people are feeling about the economy in general and whether they think it'll get stronger, weaker, or stay the same. This graph shows this outlook over the last 4 years, and as you can see, there's been a fair amount of change. Just to explain what we're looking at here, the dark blue line is how many people thought the economy will strengthen in the next year, the light blue is how many thought it would weaken, and oranges remain the same. In 2015, we saw the most confidence ever in the years we've been producing the report, when almost half of people thought the economy would strengthen, and it was the first time that more people said it would strengthen than stay the same. Now, to be fair, we run the survey in mid to late October, so what we didn't capture then was how confidence would be badly hit by the free fall in the oil price, although that did carry over into the confidence for 2016 and almost halved optimism and more than nearly tripled pessimism, if I can put it that way. Looking forward to next year, you can see we're feeling marginally more positive, with 30% thinking the economy is going to strengthen, and those think it's going to weaken further, dropping to around 15%. So how does this outlook differ regionally? Well, in BC and Ontario on the left there, you can see that confidence took a hit, but not as strongly as the national average, and we're seeing a decent improvement in optimism in 2017. Not surprisingly, the most significant drop in confidence last year was in Alberta, although Quebec also saw a big change, with the vast majority of employers expecting the market to weaken or remain the same. Alberta remains the only province that thinks a further weakening is more likely than a strengthening in 2017, although I'd say we won't have captured any change in outlook that may have come from the recent agreement by OPEC to cut oil production or approval by Prime Minister Trudeau of the Trans Mountain and Line 3 pipelines. Sentiment in Quebec has bounced back very strongly, almost to the same level as it was in late 2014. So how does the property industry see the year ahead? The industry is cautious in their outlook, as 57% say the economy will stay the same, compared to 52% on the previous slide, and 17% for seeing it weakening, which is similar to the overall expectations. Okay, so is the more positive economic outlook translating into business activity? Well, just to explain what you're looking at here, the shaded areas were what people were predicting to happen to business activity, and the solid colours are what they actually experienced in that year, if that makes sense. So what this graph really shows us is that people are typically more optimistic on how their business is going to perform over the coming year, and I think that's perfectly natural. So people usually think business activity is going to increase more than it actually does, and it's going to decrease less than it actually does. So we probably think things are going to are more likely to work out better for us than they will. What does that mean for 2017? Well, you can see a little over 60% are expecting an increase in business activity, which will probably translate into about 55% actually seeing that, whilst about 10% are predicting a drop in activity, which will probably translate into around 20 to 25% actually slowing down, which is a slightly sad prediction to make, but history tells us is probably true. By region overall, you can see a lot of difference here. Nearly 70% of employers in BC, Ontario and Quebec expect business activity to increase. Less than 10% are predicting a decrease, and despite a lot of changes in the economy, we can see that for those three provinces, business activity levels have remained fairly consistent year on year, with Quebec actually seeing consistent increases. The outlier is clearly Alberta. We can see the significant impact of the oil price on activity in 2015, with more than half of Alberta employers experiencing less activity. And this year was way more stable in terms of change in business activity, and I think represents that, fingers crossed, we've reached the bottom of the trough. What was really good news was that a significant percentage of predicted business levels would decrease, but only 25% actually experienced that, which goes against the usual trend of hopefulness. And I guess cynicism was starting to take over, and people were getting a little bit less negative than maybe the outlook was actually going to be. The prediction for 2017 is way more positive, with 40% of Albertan employers predicting an increase in activity and only around 20% expecting it to drop. And fingers crossed that's what we get. We'll take a closer look at the oil and gas market in a second. But first, let's take a look at how business activity expectations compare specifically within the property sector. Property activity was very positive compared to the overall results, with 2/3 seeing an increase instead of half, and only 12% seeing a decrease, which is about half of what we saw as the overall decrease. Looking ahead, employers are again more positive than cross-industry results, with 65% saying activity will increase compared to 61% overall. Now let's have a brief look at the impact of oil and gas. We asked all employers about how the oil and gas downturn is affecting them. So in this chart, this is whether the downturn has affected economic outlook, and you can see going clockwise from top, those first two sections are negatively and very negatively. So 38% of employers say the downturn affected their economic outlook. Looking just at the property industry, so 34% said affected their business activity, and of those affected, 45% were outside Alberta, which shows that the worst of the downturn was felt in Alberta, but it certainly wasn't exclusively there. So which industries are doing well across Canada? Well, we asked what the strongest performing sector would be, and unsurprisingly to us, banking, construction, and IT and telecommunications were the top three. Public sector is in there, and is unsurprisingly still strong, and we're seeing some more investment there from Liberal governments, provincially and federally. And finally, the pharma or life sciences sectors, which is one of the most optimistic sectors, with a lot of pharma employers saying they'll increase activity next year. What does all of this mean for hiring? Let's look in more depth at recruitment trends. Well, the short answer to this is it's not having a massive impact. In the same style as the previous graphs, this one shows expected changes to and actual changes to permanent hiring since 2014. Like business activity, we tend to be more optimistic when looking forwards than what actually happens, although we appear to be more accurate at predicting increases in permanent headcount. And I'd say that's usually because when we're predicting an increase, there's something material going on to make us believe that, maybe significant contract wins or legislative changes, for example. For next year, you can see the expectations are marginally more optimistic than last year. So I'd read this to say that there will probably be a slightly large number of employers that increase perm headcount in 2017 than did in 2016, and fewer that decrease headcount, although it looks pretty marginal. The interesting thing here is the consistency. So for 4 years, we've got about the same percentage, 35% of employers adding permanent headcount. That's amidst significant changes in economic confidence and changes in business activity levels. So what's actually going on here? And I'd say there's probably two things. So firstly, since 2008, there's been a prolonged period of economic confidence. There's not been a prolonged period of economic confidence, growth and stability. And if it's one thing going wrong, then it's another. So this time, most recently, it's been the oil price. Next time, it could be changes to the NAFTA agreement, who knows. And we believe that Canadian employers are cautious because of this lack of consistency. And the second thing is it's basically just good business decision-making from Canadian business leaders. So if things are looking up, it's an opportunity to improve productivity and profit margins, plus when things turn down a little, you haven't over-invested, so you don't need to make major cuts. It's a canniness, if you like, and I'd say it's worked pretty well. Once we have another couple of years of steady growth, it'll be interesting to see if hiring picks up, maybe getting over that 35% line again. The final point on permanent hiring, what this graph doesn't say is that employers are targeting their hiring on very specific skill sets. So I'd go so far as to say that every single company is hiring for something right now, and by that I mean they know that if they see, for example, a senior property manager with 10 years experience, with strong commercial experience in Toronto, then they'll probably hire them regardless of what's happening, as these are very hard to find people, and the same goes for virtually every industry. And regional trends look very similar, steady year on year, except Alberta again, which isn't surprising. BC and Quebec are most confident in increasing headcount, whilst most employers in Ontario are expecting to keep things steady. So going by region, BC in the top left is incredibly steady and positive every year, 40% adding more people. While economic confidence took a bit of a hit last year, it really didn't impact hiring at all, and financial year 2017 is looking way more positive. In Alberta, you can see that more than 45% of employers have reduced permanent headcount for the last 2 years. Although looking ahead, most employers in Alberta are hoping to keep headcount steady, and whether that's what will happen or not will remain to be seen. But you'd say the change in economic confidence and business activity levels, it seems like the worst is behind them. In the bottom left, you can see that Ontario is planning to keep headcounts largely steady again, following a pattern that's been fairly consistent in the past 3 years, and 2017 the majority are saying they'd like to hold it steady again. And finally in Quebec, in the bottom right, they've seen a fair bit of fluctuation in the last few years and actually saw fewer companies decrease headcount last year compared to 2015. Looking ahead, they're almost as confident as BC, with half planning to increase permanent staff numbers. And again, how does that compare to the property industry with the overall figures? Well, we can see that property employers are expecting their staff levels to remain the same, about 12 percentage points more than across the industry numbers. Property employers are being consistent with what they saw in their hiring process from the previous year, since we also see the majority kept their staff levels the same then as well. A brief look at temporary hiring. That very high orange bar indicates that most employers expect to keep temp use consistent with the last year, very few decreasing, less than 1/5 increasing temporary or contract headcount. About 55% of employers say they do use temporary workers, and this number has increased marginally each year over the last 5 years due to business activity levels increasing, but a reluctance to overcommit with permanent hiring. So more companies are moving towards using temps, but those that do are planning on keeping the use at the same level. A quick look at the property-specific numbers, and we can see here that more property employers are deciding not to hire contract workers in the next 12 months, but only slightly less are planning to increase their contract levels on the whole. So now looking at the skills shortage, how's the talent mismatch in Canada affecting business? So overall, 58% of employers say that Canada has a skills shortage. So the majority of them. In property, that number's marginally lower at 56%. However, 69% of them say that the shortage directly affects them versus 67% across all industries. These numbers are a little lower than last year, when 61% of all employers said there was a skills shortage, and 75% of them said it affected them. And really, that's a result of the oil and gas downturn and Alberta feeling the recession, because that industry and that province actually had the toughest hiring markets prior. We asked employers whether the downturn had affected their hiring, and 25% said they've been able to hire faster due to the downturn, so I guess there's always a bright side to be had. Asked about the main reason for the shortage and how this changed versus last year. Slightly more employers are blaming things like people not entering the industry, people relocating, and people leaving the industry. The Hays Global Skills Index highlighted the talent mismatch as a serious concern in Canada. We have the people, but the people don't have the skills, and the index recommended implemented targeted training as well as improving mobility between industries where that's at all possible. The lack of training and professional development remains the biggest concern, and investing in this will take input from employers, the government, industry groups, and educational institutions. We'll look at this in more detail in the next section. So in this skill short market, how are employers attracting talent? And we asked, what are you doing to attract top talent? The number one answer was offering competitive salaries, but I think we say this every year, which is that meeting market rate is important, but only one company can pay the top dollar, so you have to be able to compete on other things. The two least common attraction tools are promoting career progression and training and development, even though these are considered very important for both recruitment and retention. In fact, when we asked what employers' main retention challenges are, employers say the biggest challenge is career progression. This is followed by the competitive market, i.e. how they keep others from poaching their top talent, and then salaries actually comes in third, and everything else really drops off as it's not nearly as important. So people are leaving jobs because they're not getting career progression, and the people leaving for that reason are likely your best people because they're ambitious and competitors are looking for them. So are you doing enough to keep them? Well, 64% don't have or don't know if they have a succession plan, which I think amounts to exactly the same thing. So that's about 1/3 who do, which is actually up 10% from last year and is a good thing. And there's a further 20% that are in the process of implementing a succession plan. So some in the industry are definitely taking this seriously. When we look at the property industry, we see it's marginally worse than the average, with 66% saying they have no succession plan. So they're less prepared for the future than the general employer, if I can put it that way. If you don't have a succession plan or you aren't putting one in place, then it's unlikely you'll be able to provide the long-term career progression required for retaining high-potential employees. And those are the 10% who are probably making or about to make the biggest difference to your day-to-day business and who could be your future leaders. So it's very, very important to have one. There's no real change to the skills in demand in property. In the top 5 are commercial property managers, condo managers, tech services managers, building operators, and people with commercial leasing experience. So we've seen it becoming increasingly difficult to find experienced property managers that have the necessary licenses, and that's countrywide. The market for building operators has remained consistently skills short, and despite the downturn in the Alberta market, there's a reported shortage of 200 experienced building operators, and that's a trend that's mirrored across the country. So it's a continuation of the same things that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years in the property skills market. So how do we address less people entering the market? If you look at that donut chart on the right, the biggest segments represent lack of awareness in university and college and the industry's perception or stereotype. So those are both an issue of people either not knowing about the industry at all or having misconceptions about it. And if you combine the lack of awareness in university with the dark blue segment representing lack of awareness in grade school, then more than a third of employers say young people are not learning about their industry in the stage of life when they're starting to think about their careers. So what can we do about this? Well, we asked whose responsibility is to tackle this issue, and 35% of employers say they are, or it's theirs, which I think is very promising. The remaining 65% spread responsibility across the government, educational bodies, and industry groups, and I do think this is an issue that requires a joined-up solution, so clearly there's some thinking to do. So now to the crux of the guide, how is all this affecting salaries? So on this graph, you've got 5 years of salary trends. The dark blue is how many people did not increase salaries, orange is increased by 3% or less, and the light blue is increased by more than 3%. The short version of the slide is a more and more of a conservative approach. The trends are more companies each year offering zero increase, more companies each year offering less than a 3% increase, and less companies each year offering a more than 3% increase. If we look at the light blue bars, you can see that since 2013 it's gone down from more than 40% offering more than 3% in 2013 to just 27% last year and under 20% saying it for this year, which is quite a clear trend. And in the dark blue bar, in 2013, 15% of companies said no increase this year, and in 2016 that became a far more prevalent number, with 25% saying no increase. The orange bar represents companies saying yes to an increase, but keeping it below 3%, and that's the most common approach, again, since 2013. This is a trend, there's a clear trend towards this approach, around 45% offering a less than 3% increase in 2013 and 55% saying that's the plan for the year ahead. So over the last 5 years, we've seen more companies offering either no increase or less than 3%. Against the backdrop of increases and decreases in confidence and in business activity, such a clear trend may look a little at odds. How come this isn't changing with the ups and downs of the economy? Well, I'd say it's for exactly the same reason as we're not seeing hiring change. So we haven't seen for a few years of consistent economic growth across the country and across industries for approaching 10 years now, and people are cautious, and I think it's as simple as that. Another point to add is that almost 20% of companies said that they are able to offer lower than usual compensation due to the economic downturn. So this is reducing pressure to increase salaries in some areas or industries. Now, I think I've put that in a fairly negative way and that it's bad news for your pocket, but to spin it differently, I'd say that actually 81% of employers say they'll increase salaries next year, and point out that fewer are planning a zero change in 2017. So I actually think there's some very good news as well. So how about the property industry? Well, you can see in this chart the property sector seems to have felt the challenging markets less than other industries. This year only 15% of employers reported a zero increase, 55% offered up to a 3% increase, and 27.5% gave an increase above 3%. So that was marginally better than the average. 2017 looks even better from an increase perspective, with only 9% saying they're going to have zero increase, 60% are offering up to a 3% or below a 3% increase, and more than 30% suggesting they're going to offer more than a 3% increase. So it looks like property is the industry to be in 2017. Clearly you can see that bullishness about business activity for the year ahead is translating into positive returns for large parts of the workforce, which is good news for them. So the previous slides were a bit of a catch-all, i.e. plans that cover every employee. And what we wanted to see is if companies are using a two-speed approach to salaries, and asked whether you'll change compensation plans to attract top talent. So in the dark blue wedge, you can see that 20% of employers say, yes, we've done that. Another almost 5% are saying that they plan to do so in the coming year, and another 38% are saying they haven't done so, but would be willing to do it. That's a total of 64% saying they would or are willing to change their salary plans to attract specific people. And this is similar to the approach on hiring. So overall conservative, but when it comes to a specific skill sets, a very different and more aggressive approach is being used. Looking at the chart below, the grey and blue areas show where people are feeling wage pressure the most, so you can see it is highest at the mid to senior level. Overall, more than 60% are feeling at least some wage pressure at this level, and almost as many say they're experiencing it at director level and above. So I predict that we'll see employers giving really targeted compensation increases to employees who are the most important to retain, the 10% who drive results, and are the future leaders of the business. Looking at what Canadian property employees told us, 2/3 got a pay increase last year, and 3/4 of employees say they expect to get a salary increase next year, which, based on the stats from the last slide, should mean most of them have their expectations met. We'll see next year if this is accurate and turns out to be the truth, but I guess there might be a word of warning in here for you if you're not planning to increase salaries. It would be worth bearing in mind your employee expectations and what it looks like your competition is planning on doing. Now, to be fair, I don't think everyone needs to get a pay rise every year, but if you're not meeting expectations around compensation, then you need to be communicating with employees about why that is and looking at other areas of improvement, such as benefits, which is a great segue into the next slide. So what are you missing from your benefits plan, and what insights do we have for you? So looking at benefits now, we've talked a lot about targeted attraction, and I think the benefits package is one of the best ways to stand out. So we asked employees what benefits are most valuable to them, and these are the top 5. So vacation, performance bonuses, pension and RSP support, training and development, and flexible work hours. The top benefit is always vacation. We know for a fact that more vacation time is the only benefit that will make people accept a lower salary. Anyway, these represent opportunities for you to stand out and offer candidates what they actually want. But how many employers are doing that? Well, only 56 of employers are offering more than 2 weeks vacation to new hires, just under half offer bonuses, 52% offer pension or RSP support. We've already talked about the importance of training and development, and yet only 47% of employers include that in their package. And finally, flexible work options, which 49% of employers offer. So these are all opportunities. If you can offer more of these, then you're doing better than your competitors. So let's look at what employers are planning for next year. Well, these are the benefits that employers are planning to add next year. They're in fairly small numbers. For example, about 5% of employers plan to add flexible work options. However, it does show that employers are looking for ways to differentiate themselves from their competition. What I think is most interesting is that this list really resembles the one above. So employers know what's valuable to candidates. They are pushing the right buttons. However, there is one big piece missing, and that is training and development support is not even in the top 5. It's not actually even in the top 10 of what employers plan to add next year. Less than 2% of employers say they're adding this to attract or retain talent. So if you're not training to get the skills you need, and you're not training to address productivity issues, and you don't include training in your benefits as a recruitment and retention tool, then you're really missing out on a very important opportunity. I think one barrier is that people see training as an expensive exercise. It doesn't have to be. You can bring in an external trainer for half a day, or organise lunch and learns, or set up internal mentorship programs to help pass on critical knowledge that you're going to lose as people retire. There's really lots of ways that you can offer training, no matter your company size or budget. It just takes a bit of planning, and we think this is a very important thing to try and achieve. So that's the bigger picture. We'll go through a quick summary now, and I'll start with our key findings. So confidence in the economy is improving. Employers outside of Alberta are optimistic for future business activity. Alberta is hoping for modest improvement. Employers are using contingent workers to manage workloads, but they don't have visibility on those resources. Skills shortages are top of employers' concerns, and most are focused on compensation and benefits to attract talent. Salary increases of less than 3% persist, and employers are targeting increases to get and keep the best talent. And building on that, here are the top 5 recommendations that we think will help you and your teams succeed this year. So develop an attraction plan to fill those roles becoming available due to retiring employees, so you aren't left with a gap. Consider professionals from other sectors and what transferable skills they could bring to your organisation. Add training as a benefit to engage and retain high potential employees and to grow your own experts. If you're not sure what to expect from the year, consider using temporary or contract resources to keep up with changes, and create a talent pipeline, even if you're not currently hiring, by developing your employer brand online. Okay, so that's the end of the key messages we wanted to share today. Thank you very much for dialing in and listening. I hope you found it useful and that you've got at least 1 or 2 constructive ideas or points from it. We now have a couple of minutes to spare to answer any questions. We've got up to sort of 5 or 10 minutes to answer questions. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we'll do our very best to answer it. As I said, I've got Matt and Mazen online to help me with any answers that I can't field myself. As I said, the hard copy of the guide is available from December the 19th. The soft copy is available from January the 16th, at which time we'll email you a copy through. If you'd like a hard copy, feel free to reach out to us and we'll have one delivered to you as soon as we can. So if you type your questions in, let's see what questions we have. Thank you very much for listening in. If you have any specific questions you want to send direct to myself, my email address is there on the screen. It looks like we've got one question coming through. So we've been discussing succession planning and training over the last year, but we haven't really managed to get anything going yet, mainly because we can't agree on priorities. Any advice on how to get started? Well, I could give you, I guess, my penny's worth on that. So I think one of the starting point can be one of the most challenging things. I think that when you talk succession planning and training programs, that it's such a vast topic that really understanding the purpose of what you're trying to achieve is the key, and I think you need to start thinking about where your business is going over the next 2, 3, 4 years, and exactly what skills in the business you're going to need to achieve those tasks. And that may have to take into account the fact that you've got a bunch of baby boomers retiring, or you've got a real lack of management at the intermediate level, or simply high performers coming through. So you need to match the needs of your business to the staff that you have coming through your organisation and work back from there. So can you identify your high potential employees and what skills they need to develop between now and a certain point in time, whether that's 2 years' time or 3 years' time, to enable them to step up into positions of more responsibility, and then to provide training to them around that. And as I said before, that could be simple lunch and learns. It could be having a mentor that they spend time with every month or every 2 months to work on developing key skills. It could simply be giving them exposure to different parts of the business, inviting them to board meetings, for example, so they start to see how the business operates. But it's really about preparing your workforce to step into roles that you're going to require them to do in the future. Now, if the issue is you don't have people with the capacity to do that, then you've got to look at how are you going to hire those people, where are the real gaps in your organisation that you need to look at hiring talent in for, and preparing yourself for the future that way. But I think once you get started and thinking about it in that way, as in simply looking about what we need for the future and what we currently have, then I think is a very good starting point. And I would hasten to add, it doesn't take a huge amount of money to do this. The biggest investment is time. We've done it at Hayes ourselves, and really all it is about getting organised about how you look at the thing, being consistent with it, and putting it on the agenda every month to make sure you're talking about it. So that's the answer I'd give to that. That's the only question we've got coming through by the looks of it. So at this stage, I say thank you very much, everybody, for dialing in. As I said, feel free to request your hard copies of the guide. We'll send them through, and the soft copies will be available from January the 16th. Have a very good festive season, and thank you very much. Bye, everybody.